Billionaire Groom mocked his black bride's parents. Their $1 billion secret silenced him. The grand wedding was the talk of the town, a spectacle of shimmering gowns, polished shoes, and glittering jewelry that reflected the chandeliers above. Guests whispered excitedly as they mingled, champagne glasses clinking, the hum of polite laughter filling the enormous hall. But beneath the glitz and glamour, tension simmered like a quiet storm. The billionaire groom, infamous for his arrogance and sharp tongue, had arrived with a smug expression, fully aware of the power his wealth gave him, yet ignorant of the true power seated in the family he was about to insult. As the bride's parents approached him to greet the couple, he leaned in with a sly smirk, allowing his words to carry just enough for others to hear, mocking their seemingly modest lifestyle. He joked about their humble beginnings, a way that made several nearby guests chuckle awkwardly, thinking it was harmless banter, yet the bride's eyes flared with anger and disbelief. There was a silence in her heart, a tension that told her this moment would define the rest of the evening. Everyone assumed her parents would quietly bear the insult. They were soft-spoken, careful not to attract attention, and often blended into the background of social gatherings. However, what no one knew was that their quiet demeanor concealed decades of shrewd business moves, strategic investments, and a private fortune that rivaled some of the wealthiest families in the country. As the groom continued his condescending remarks, the bride subtly shifted closer to her parents, sensing the moment to reveal the truth. Calmly, her father raised his voice just enough to reach the surrounding guests, delivering a statement that silenced the room. The laughter died instantly as eyes turned to him, realization dawning slowly that the very people mocked for their modest appearance were, in fact, billionaires in their own right. Murmurs spread through the crowd, a ripple of shock and astonishment, while the groom's confident smile faltered, his face flushing with disbelief. The bride's mother added a graceful yet pointed touch, presenting an invitation to their annual Investors' Gala, an event known only to the elite of the business world, attended by the country's most influential entrepreneurs and decision-makers. Suddenly, the arrogance of the groom, once so blindingly bold, seemed small and childish in comparison to the quiet authority emanating from the bride's parents. As the ceremony resumed, the bride held her head high, her smile calm yet triumphant, knowing that her family had defended their honor without raising their voice or losing their composure. The groom, now humbled, realized that true wealth was more than flashy appearances and empty arrogance. It was patience, strategy, and the power to command respect quietly yet unmistakably. By the end of the evening, whispers of admiration for the bride's family replaced the laughter that had once mocked them, and the billionaire groom left with a lesson engraved deeply in his mind. Never underestimate anyone, no matter how ordinary they may appear. The bride's family became the quiet legend of the night, a reminder to everyone that respect and dignity, paired with true power, could silence even the loudest arrogance. The bride's parents smiled politely, their expressions calm and unassuming, but beneath that composed exterior lay decades of hard work, intelligence, and careful planning that had quietly transformed them into billionaires, a fact no one at the wedding could have guessed. They had built their fortune in secrecy, investing wisely in emerging tech companies, real estate ventures, and private equity, always avoiding the limelight, never flaunting their wealth, and teaching their daughter the value of humility alongside power. As the groom continued with his condescending remarks, dismissing their achievements and mocking their appearance, the atmosphere around him began to shift imperceptibly, like a storm approaching on the horizon. The bride, standing tall in her elegant gown that shimmered softly under the chandelier light, felt an invisible strength emanate from her parents, a calm confidence that seemed to fill the room and make the arrogant smirk on the groom's face falter slightly. Guests who had initially laughed nervously at his jokes now exchanged glances, sensing that the power dynamic had subtly begun to change. Then, with a quiet authority that demanded attention, her father spoke. His voice was steady, measured, and carried just enough volume to reach the nearest guest without seeming like a public confrontation. He revealed a truth that stunned everyone within earshot, a single statement that made the room pause and the air grow heavy with realization. The guests turned toward the source of the revelation, eyes widening, jaws tightening, and conversations dying mid-word as the truth sank in. The couple he had mocked, whom he had dismissed so lightly, were not just equals to him in influence and wealth. In many ways, they were far above him, their discrete billions and strategic power dwarfing the image of wealth he had flaunted so carelessly. The groom's confident demeanor cracked, his laughter faltering and fading as an uncomfortable tension replaced the earlier amusement. He tried to recover, searching for a witty retort or a dismissive comment, but nothing came. The room had shifted under the weight of the revelation, the balance of power unmistakably realigned. The bride, sensing the moment, allowed herself a subtle smile, proud of the calm dignity her parents had maintained throughout the confrontation, knowing that their quiet confidence had spoken louder than any defense, argument, or insult ever could. In that instant, everyone present recognized the lesson silently imparted. Arrogance and mockery could not outweigh intelligence, patience, and a lifetime of hard-earned achievements, and appearances could never reliably indicate the true depth of a person's power. The groom, humbled and uncertain, could only stand there as the bride's parents, composed and commanding without a trace of bitterness, reminded the room, and him, that respect and quiet strength often held far more weight than the loud boasts of wealth and status. The billionaire groom's confident smirk, which had once seemed untouchable, began to falter as he realized that the bride's family was far more than they appeared, and the laughter he had expected to echo around the room now seemed hollow against the sudden shift in energy. He tried to mask his embarrassment with a forced chuckle, hoping no one would notice the tension creeping into his posture, but the bride's mother, poised and graceful, had more to reveal, and her calm authority carried a weight that silenced even the faintest whispers. With an elegant smile, she reached into her clutch and handed him a beautifully embossed invitation to their exclusive annual Investors' Gala, an event so private and influential that attendance alone was considered a mark of the highest prestige, and some of the groom's own biggest business rivals were regular participants. The room, which had been filled with polite chatter and the clinking of glasses moments earlier, fell into a stunned hush as murmurs spread like wildfire among the guests, each realization bigger than the last. Slowly, everyone began to understand the magnitude of the bride's family's influence. They weren't just wealthy, they were powerful, strategic, and commanding in ways that no casual observer could have anticipated. The groom's eyes darted nervously, searching for a familiar ally in the crowd, someone to reaffirm his sense of superiority, but he found only curious onlookers whose expressions had shifted from amusement to awe. He tried to regain control, straightening his posture and attempting another laugh, but it fell flat, echoing in the suddenly tense atmosphere, and he realized that the playful arrogance he had relied upon for years had no place here. The bride's parents, however, remained perfectly composed, radiating a quiet confidence that spoke louder than any defensive words could have. They were not angry, nor were they seeking to humiliate him. They were simply demonstrating that wealth, influence, and respect are not measured by appearances, by the loudness of one's voice, or by a show of social status, but by the substance of achievement, strategy, and integrity over time. As the ceremony resumed, the room itself seemed subtly realigned, the guests unconsciously placing their attention and admiration on the calm, dignified family rather than the flustered groom who had assumed he was at the center of every eye. Every gesture, every glance from the bride's parents reinforced their authority without the need for confrontation. Their presence alone was enough to establish that they were not to be underestimated. The groom, once self-assured and untouchable, now struggled to maintain composure, aware that the power he had flaunted moments before had shifted entirely. In that moment, the lesson was clear not only to him, but to everyone watching. Arrogance and mockery cannot surpass quiet intelligence and genuine influence, and the true measure of a person's worth is often hidden behind the most unassuming exterior. As the couple exchanged their vows, the atmosphere in the grand hall shifted subtly, a quiet tension giving way to a feeling of profound respect for the bride's family, whose calm dignity had completely transformed the energy of the room. The bride's smile held a quiet triumph, not just for herself, but for the parents who had guided her through life with wisdom, resilience, and an unshakable sense of self-worth. Their actions that evening had been deliberate, composed, and yet powerful, demonstrating to everyone present that true influence does not require loud words, ostentatious displays, or insults aimed at belittling others. It is cultivated through years of hard work, strategy, patience, and moral integrity. The guests, many of whom had come expecting a glamorous spectacle of wealth and superficial showmanship, were instead treated to a masterclass in humility, respect, and understated authority. The billionaire groom, who had once worn his arrogance like armor and reveled in the admiration of others, now stood red-faced and humbled, painfully aware that the assumptions he had made about the bride's family were entirely wrong. Every smirk and dismissive comment he had offered earlier now seemed small and foolish in the face of their composed revelation of power and influence. As the ceremony continued, the bride's parents quietly commanded attention, their very presence a reminder that real success is measured not by appearances, titles, or wealth alone, but by the combination of intelligence, foresight, and the ability to navigate life's challenges with dignity. From that moment on, stories of the evening would circulate among guests, quietly shared and whispered about how the seemingly unassuming family had turned a scene of potential humiliation into a demonstration of strategic brilliance and respect that no one could ignore. The bride, aware of the lesson unfolding before her, felt a deep sense of gratitude and pride, understanding that her parents' calm intervention had not only defended her honor, but had also instilled a lasting impression on everyone present about the power of humility paired with confidence. Meanwhile, the groom's perspective shifted completely. He realized that arrogance, no matter how much wealth it was backed by, could never outshine true wisdom, experience, and strategic thinking. The evening left an indelible mark on him, a permanent reminder that underestimating anyone, judging solely by appearances or mocking those who seem ordinary can have consequences far beyond the moment. By the time the couple left the hall, the bride's family had become a quiet legend in social circles, celebrated not for the wealth they possessed but for the intelligence, poise, and strategic foresight they had displayed in an unforgettable moment. Their story, shared in hushed tones at gatherings, would inspire respect and admiration for years, a testament to the fact that staying calm, confident, and deliberate in the face of disrespect always prevails over arrogance and impulsive judgment. The once arrogant billionaire groom would carry the memory of that evening with him forever, never again underestimating anyone, and forever reminded that true power lies in patience, strategy, and the quiet but undeniable force of integrity.